Hey there, Jim Rohn here. If you've ever been on the receiving end of someone's silence, especially after you felt the two of you were getting closer, you probably know how painful and confusing that space can be. One day, they're warm, responsive, maybe even affectionate, and the next, nothing. The texts slow down, the phone goes quiet, and you're left wondering if you did something wrong. It feels personal. It feels like rejection. And if you've ever loved someone with an avoidant attachment style, you know that this kind of silence can feel like emotional whiplash. But what if I told you that their silence isn't always what it seems? That underneath the distance, there's often a hidden longing to connect, but they just don't know how to do it safely. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through 4 hidden ways that avoidant silence is actually a call for connection, not a shutdown, not a punishment, but a protective reflex rooted in past emotional wounds. Once you start to recognize these signs for what they really are, everything changes. You stop blaming yourself. You stop chasing clarity, and you start seeing their silence not as rejection, but as a roadmap to understanding what they're too scared to say out loud. We're going to dig deep. No fluff, no guesswork, just clear, grounded insight that can help you make sense of the mixed signals and navigate this dynamic with more peace and power. So if you're ready to stop taking their distance personally and start decoding what's really going on underneath the silence, make sure to stick around. And before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you don't miss any of the weekly content here. I'm Jim Rohn, and every week I help you navigate relationships with emotional clarity, compassion, and self-respect. Let's get started. Let's talk about what's really happening when someone with an avoidant attachment style goes quiet. Because chances are, if you're watching this, you've experienced that sudden shift. One moment, things feel emotionally warm, maybe even deeply connected. And the next, it's like a door quietly closes. They stop texting. They cancel plans. Their tone becomes more distant. It's easy to assume it means they've lost interest or that you've done something wrong. But in many cases, their silence isn't a sign that they don't care. It's a sign that they're overwhelmed. Avoidant individuals often grow up in emotionally unsafe environments. That doesn't always mean something dramatic or abusive happened. It can simply mean that their emotional world wasn't validated. Maybe when they were upset as kids, they were told to toughen up, or were punished for being too sensitive. Maybe no one asked how they felt or modeled how to handle emotional closeness. Over time, they learned that being vulnerable meant being exposed, and that exposure usually led to hurt or rejection. So they did the only thing that made sense to their nervous system. They shut down. This is the foundation of avoidant attachment. It's not about not feeling. It's about not knowing how to feel and stay safe at the same time. So, as adults, when avoidants encounter real emotional intimacy, especially the kind that feels unpredictable or intense, it sends their internal alarm bells ringing. Their body says, "This is dangerous. Get space. Retreat." And so they do. Not to punish you, not because they don't care, but because closeness to them often feels like a threat. Their silence then becomes a form of emotional armor. It gives them space to regulate, to reestablish a sense of control. But from the outside, it can feel like rejection. It can feel cold, calculated, or even cruel. And unless you understand what's happening beneath the surface, it's easy to take it personally and spiral into anxiety, self-doubt, or even self-blame. I want to emphasize something important here. Just because their silence has a psychological root doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And it doesn't mean you have to accept it as your emotional baseline. But when you can see that their withdrawal is often a fear response, not a lack of care, it changes how you hold space for yourself. It invites compassion without sacrificing your boundaries. It reminds you that their silence isn't about your worth, it's about their wiring. In the next part of this video, we'll explore the first hidden way avoidant silence is actually a quiet call for connection, and how you can start responding in a way that protects your peace while still honoring the truth of the dynamic. Stick with me, this gets clearer. So how does all of this actually show up in relationships? If you've ever been in a connection with an avoidant partner, you've likely seen it firsthand. Things might be going well, maybe even better than expected. You share a great weekend together. They open up emotionally. There's laughter, maybe even vulnerability. It feels like the connection is finally deepening. But then something shifts. They pull back. Suddenly the texts slow down, the energy cools, and you're left wondering, what just happened? It feels like emotional whiplash. What's happening in these moments is what I call the intimacy trigger. For the avoidant, emotional closeness can be intoxicating, but also terrifying. That weekend you just spent together might have felt beautiful to you. But for them, it might have cracked open a part of themselves they usually keep locked away. So how does all of this actually show up in relationships? If you've ever been in a connection with an avoidant partner, you've likely seen it firsthand. Things might be going well, maybe even better than expected. You share a great weekend together. They open up emotionally. There's laughter, maybe even vulnerability. It feels like the connection is finally deepening. But then something shifts. They pull back. Suddenly the texts slow down, the energy cools, and you're left wondering, what just happened? It feels like emotional whiplash. What's happening in these moments is what I call the intimacy trigger. For the avoidant, emotional closeness can be intoxicating, but also terrifying. That weekend you just spent together might have felt beautiful to you. But for them, it might have cracked open a part of themselves they usually keep locked away. That much closeness, that much emotional presence can trigger old, unresolved fears like being judged, misunderstood, or losing themselves in the relationship. Their nervous system, which was trained from early on to equate closeness with danger, goes into protection mode. The walls go up, not because they're done with you, but because it all just felt too real. This is why you'll often see mixed signals with avoidant individuals. One day, they're affectionate, present, engaged. The next, they're cool, vague, maybe even unresponsive. These shifts aren't games. They're symptoms of inner conflict, a push-pull between the desire for connection and the fear of it. They want to be close, but closeness also triggers a deep, often unconscious fear of being seen too clearly or needing someone too much. Take a moment and really let that sink in. Their withdrawal is rarely about you. It's about their fear of being vulnerable, of losing control, of repeating emotional pain they never learned how to navigate. That silence they retreat into, it's not about punishing you. It's about surviving what feels to them like emotional exposure. Now, this doesn't mean you should ignore the impact their behavior has on you. You still have a right to feel hurt, confused, even frustrated. But when you can start to understand where it comes from, you stop personalizing it. You stop blaming yourself. And most importantly, you stop trying to fix something that isn't yours to fix. Your job isn't to manage their fears. It's to stay grounded in your own needs and boundaries while navigating the space with clarity and compassion. In the next part of this video, we're going to explore one of the most overlooked signals that avoidant silence is actually a quiet call for connection. Once you know what to look for, you can stop chasing clarity and start standing in it. Stick around. It gets clearer from here. So, when they find themselves in situations where feelings start to rise, either their own or their partner's, it can feel like too much. They don't know how to process it, let alone communicate it. So instead, they retreat. They get quiet. They pull away, not because they're cold or indifferent, but because they're overwhelmed and trying to regain emotional control. Now, I'm not saying their silence doesn't hurt. It absolutely does. But the pain you feel when they pull away is often made worse by the story you tell yourself about why they're pulling away. If you assume their silence means they don't care, you're going to start chasing, over-explaining, or blaming yourself. And that's where things often break down, because the more you push in those moments, the more the avoidant partner feels smothered, and the more they retreat. Underneath that silence, though, there is usually a lot going on emotionally. What they rarely show you is the internal battle happening in their mind. One of the hardest parts about being close to someone with an avoidant attachment style is what happens when they go silent. For most people on the receiving end, that silence feels like rejection. You might start questioning everything. Did I say too much? Was I too needy? Did I ruin it by wanting more? It's incredibly painful, and it can send even the most grounded person into a spiral of self-doubt. But here's what I want you to hear, loud and clear. Avoidant silence is rarely about you. It's not about your worth, your emotional needs, or anything you did wrong. It's about their internal experience, and more often than not, it's about emotional overload, not emotional absence. Avoidant individuals tend to freeze or shut down when intimacy feels too intense. Remember, they were often raised in environments where emotional expression wasn't safe or welcome. So when they find themselves in situations where feelings start to rise, either their own or their partner's, it can feel like too much. They don't know how to process it, let alone communicate it. So instead, they retreat. They get quiet. They pull away, not because they're cold or indifferent, but because they're overwhelmed and trying to regain emotional control. Now, I'm not saying their silence doesn't hurt. It absolutely does. But the pain you feel when they pull away is often made worse by the story you tell yourself about why they're pulling away. If you assume their silence means they don't care, you're going to start chasing, over-explaining, or blaming yourself. And that's where things often break down, because the more you push in those moments, the more the avoidant partner feels smothered, and the more they retreat. Underneath that silence, though, there's usually a lot going on emotionally. What they rarely show you is the internal battle happening in their mind. They might be thinking, what if I get too close and it all falls apart? What if they see the real me and leave anyway? What if I'm not enough? These aren't always conscious thoughts, but they're there. Shame, fear, confusion, and often a deep sense of emotional incompetence. They want connection, but they're scared of what it requires. Let me give you a simple example. I worked with someone once, let's call her Natalie, who was in a relationship with an avoidant partner. After a few months of growing closeness, She noticed he started to go quiet after any meaningful interaction. If they had a deep talk or shared a really connected weekend, he'd disappear for a few days. No calls, minimal texts. Natalie felt gutted every time. Her mind told her he was losing interest. But when we looked at the pattern together, it became clear every time emotional intimacy increased, so did his emotional overload. And his silence. That was his nervous system hitting the brakes. When she stopped internalizing his withdrawal and started seeing it as a sign of his discomfort with closeness, not her failure, things shifted. She stopped chafing. She set gentle boundaries. She started protecting her emotional space instead of anxiously filling in the silence. And over time, that created room for him to come forward without feeling pushed. Here's the truth. Their silence is not your responsibility to decode or fix, but understanding it for what it really is, a protective reflex, not rejection, helps you stop blaming yourself. It helps you stay steady, and most importantly, it gives you the clarity to decide what you need in return. In the next section, we'll talk about what to do when you're in the middle of avoidant silence, how to take care of yourself without falling into the trap of overfunctioning or abandoning your needs just to keep the peace. Hang in there. You're not alone in this. So let's talk about healing and growth, because while understanding why avoidant silence happens is important, it's not the full story. The real transformation begins when we start to respond differently, both as avoidants and as partners of avoidance. That means recognizing the pattern, meeting it with awareness instead of reactivity, and slowly learning how to shift the emotional dynamic from fear and distance to safety and connection. For the avoidant individual, the first step is self-awareness. They have to start noticing when they're pulling away and ask themselves why. Is it because the other person did something wrong? Or is it because closeness is triggering a part of them that learned long ago that vulnerability equals danger? This isn't easy work. Sitting with emotional discomfort, especially when you were never taught how to name or hold it, feels scary. But healing happens when they stop running from that discomfort and start getting curious about it. When they pause long enough to say, "I feel overwhelmed right now, but that doesn't mean I have to shut down," they begin to break the cycle. Part of that process also includes learning how to name their internal experience. Avoidants often struggle to express what's going on emotionally, not because they don't feel, but because they never developed the language to communicate their feelings safely. So instead of saying, "I need a little space to think, but I still care about you," they go silent. That silence protects them, but it also isolates them. The more they practice saying the small, honest things, even when it feels awkward, the more connection becomes possible. Vulnerable communication doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. And for the person on the other side, the partner, the friend, the loved one, growth means stepping out of the cycle too. It means not taking their silence as a reflection of your worth. It means not overcompensating, chasing, or trying to fix their discomfort at the cost of your own. Your role isn't to make them feel safe by losing yourself. It's to hold space for your needs and emotions while being clear about your boundaries. You can say, "I care about you, but I need communication. I don't feel safe when I'm shut out." That's not pressure, that's honesty. And healthy connection needs it. Growth in these relationships happens when silence is no longer the default, when avoidants learn to stay with the feeling instead of running from it, when partners stop interpreting withdrawal as rejection and start responding with both compassion and firmness. And most importantly, when both people decide that connection is worth showing up for, even when it feels vulnerable, even when it's messy. Because real connection doesn't come from perfect emotional control. It comes from two imperfect people choosing to stay, choosing to speak, even if the words shake. When silence becomes dialogue and fear gives way to truth, that's when healing begins. That's when the armor starts to come off and something real can finally grow in its place. Avoidant silence isn't always a rejection. Often, it's a quiet, vulnerable, I don't know how to stay close without feeling unsafe. It's not about a lack of emotion. It's about too many emotions, too fast, with no roadmap for how to handle them. When someone grows up in an emotionally unpredictable or critical environment, closeness doesn't feel comforting. It feels dangerous. So when intimacy enters the room, their nervous system reacts by creating distance, not because they don't care, but because that's how they've learned to survive connection. In this video, we've explored the deeper reasons behind avoidant withdrawal, the emotional wiring shaped by early relationships, the inner conflict between wanting closeness and fearing it, and the way silence becomes a protective shell rather than a punishment. We talked about how this shows up in real-life relationships, the push-pull dynamic, the mixed signals, the deep hurt it causes for both people involved. And, most importantly, we looked at the pathway to healing. Growth happens when avoidant individuals start to recognize their patterns, get curious instead of reactive, and learn to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. It happens when they build the courage to name their needs, even when the words feel shaky. On the other side, partners can practice holding space, not by rescuing or chasing, but by standing firmly in their own emotional truth, setting boundaries, speaking clearly, not personalizing the silence, but also not settling for it. Real connection doesn't mean never feeling fear. It means choosing honesty over hiding presence, over protection, and dialogue over distance, even when it's hard. When both people are willing to show up differently, the silence becomes a bridge instead of a wall. And that's where true emotional intimacy begins. Thank you so much for watching. If this video helped bring you clarity or gave you a new perspective, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. I post weekly content to help you navigate emotionally complex relationships with more self-respect, calm, and confidence. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you experienced avoidant silence in a relationship? What helped you better understand it or set boundaries around it? Your voice matters here, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Until next time, take care of your heart, speak your truth, and remember, silence isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of learning how to stay.